Now, the title of this year's forum is, of course, Securing Our Future in a Disrupted World, and there is perhaps no greater threat to that future than the onset of climate change, which has been raised from the very beginning of today's events, and the related issue of energy security. With the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, postponed now until next year, we can't afford to lose sight of this global issue, and our nations must establish a credible and a leading position on it. At the forefront of this is meeting the Paris climate goals. And as part of this, the UK government has set a target to reach net zero by 2050. We'll be talking about that in a moment. But first, the Atlantic Future Forum director, Stephen Watson, caught up with the CEO of BP, Bernard Looney, last week and asked him about BP's own journey along the road to a post-carbon world.
Bernard, welcome to the Atlantic Future Forum.
Stephen, thank you for having me, and thanks to everybody for the invite. Great to be here.
Delighted. We're here just before our panel on the challenge and some of the threats really around climate change. I mean, it is impacting security, our prosperity agenda. Now, BP wants to play its part. You are saying that you're going to be net zero by 2050, 30 years' time. How is that possible?
Well, it's a great question, and I think, first of all, it is possible, and of course that's why we said we're going to do it. I'm not suggesting that it's going to be easy, but it is something that we're confident that we can and will do. I think also importantly, it's important for the world that we do it, so it's almost like we have to do it as well. But we will do it. We set out a new purpose, Stephen, earlier in the year, which is to reimagine energy for people and the planet. We then set the net zero ambition. And then people said, that's all very well, but that's 30 years away. We'd actually like some more details. So on August the 4th, we laid out the strategy of the company. And in essence, that strategy is about a company that's been an international oil company for 111 years. And what we want to do is to move from what we call an IOC that's focused on producing resources to an integrated energy company that's focused on providing energy solutions for customers. And we're going to grow a low carbon business. We're going to actually shrink over time our upstream oil and gas business. And we're going to grow our consumer and mobility business. So it's not going to be easy. It's not a straight line. It's something we feel we have to do. It's something we feel we want to do. And it's now about getting down to the knitting and getting after the things that will deliver on it.
But at the heart of that, presumably, are low carbon technologies and solutions. I mean, how viable and proven is that?
Well, I think it's very viable in many ways. Yes, of course, there are technologies that need to be developed, but a lot of the technologies that are needed already exist. What we need really is the application of them at scale. And I think you only have to look at what's happening in the wind space or in solar panels. Solar panels down, I think, 80% in cost over the last decade. Batteries down 90% in cost. And it is this sort of unstoppable march of cost reduction that comes with the application of these technologies. You know, when you start and you look at them, you think, this may not work. But when you start to apply them and then people start to replicate it, there is a learning curve. So the technologies exist. What we need to do is to apply them at scale. And that's...
But that scale and momentum, I mean, how do we force that into the system?
I think it's a combination of private sector has a role to play. I think society, consumers, customers have a role to play, and governments have a role to play. We came out very clearly and said, look, we want to get to net zero by 2050 or sooner, by the way. But it's not just enough for us to get to net zero because we're a medium-sized company, but we're not going to solve the world's problems on our own. So we said, we're going to put out 5 aims that help us get to net zero, and then we're going to do 5 things that will help the world get to net zero. So, for example, in the matter of policy, public policy and advocacy, and what policies we advocate for, we said, you know, we'll shut down a corporate reputation advertising campaign and we'll redirect the money from that into policies that governments could implement that would accelerate the transition. So I think it is a combination. I think everybody has a role to play. And we certainly have a role to play in helping the world. But it will take all of us working together, no question about it.
Now, arguably, there's no greater scale than in the United States. And you're big in America. I mean, you've been in the US for, I think, 150 years. In the last 15, you've invested over $100 billion. How important is it that we get an alignment between, what we're thinking about here in the UK and how that works in the United States?
Well, I think, so first of all, America is very important to BP. It represents about 40% of our capital employed. It represents about 40% of our shareholders are actually based in the United States. And as you said, Stephen, I think we're the largest energy investor in America, BP, since 2005. So America is a very important region for BP. What I would say is that our strategy, number one, still relies on hydrocarbons. It still relies on hydrocarbons because even though we will shrink it, we will focus it. And it is that hydrocarbons that will generate the cash flows that will allow us to invest. And we're talking about going from $500 million per year in low carbon to $5 billion, a tenfold increase, going from 2.5 gigawatts to 50 gigawatts. That money has to come from somewhere, and it's going to come from hydrocarbons, and we have a big hydrocarbons business in America. And then secondly, Stephen, the only thing that I would say is that I think people's attitude to climate and to the energy transition is changing constantly around the world. And what I mean by that is I think everybody is moving in the same direction, including the United States. People may start from different positions, but I think the general direction of travel is one around a recognition of climate change as a real challenge and one of embracing the energy transition. People always say, is this just a Western problem? Is this just a problem for the rich West? No matter where I go in the world, and been able to travel less than I would like, but if I go to Angola, if I go to Azerbaijan, if I go to Indonesia, if I go to Algeria, people want the same thing. They want energy that's reliable. They want it to be affordable. But if you give them the choice, they also want it to be clean. So everybody actually wants the same thing. We just start in very different places. So I think there's a shifting momentum here in this direction in the United States as well. But it's happening all over the world.
I suppose bluntly, people would applaud you and applaud the stance that BP is taking as a private sector enterprise in really pushing the boundaries and making. I mean, you're betting the future of the BP bank on the outcomes that you're talking about here. But you are going to need engagement with political leaders, some of those political leaders at the AFF here today. I mean, what is your message about how this private-public endeavour should effectively come together to deliver the sort of outcomes that you want to see?
Well, I think, Stephen, it's a very good question. And the first thing I should say is that, we're doing this because we believe it's the right thing for the world, but we also see it as a massive business opportunity. So this isn't some form of charity. This isn't some form of altruism. This is because we believe strongly that this is an opportunity to create enormous value for all of our stakeholders, not just society, not just our employees, but also our shareholders. So we start from that premise that this is actually the right thing to do, but it's also the right business outcome for BP. What we need, I think what you'd love if you were to wake up in the morning with a wish granted, it would be a global carbon price. I think the reality is the point I made earlier, that we're all starting in different places, means that that's actually a big ask. Now, having said that, 190 countries have signed up to Paris. I think it's something like 100 countries around the world either have a net zero ambition or are working on a net zero ambition. And our job is to support those countries or those local states sometimes where they are trying to put policies in place that advance the transition. So we are supportive of a carbon pricing regime in Washington State in the United States. We're supportive of regulations in the East Coast of the United States around RGGI, which will decrease the carbon footprint. The same here in Holland, in Europe. We're supportive of the Green Deal here in Europe in principle. The details have to be worked. So very much wanting a price ultimately to be put on carbon. It's an externality, and until people sort of have to pay for that, it probably doesn't get worked properly in the market. So that's what we'd love. And in the meantime, before there's a big solution, which I think is a very big ask, we will work with local governments to do what we can locally.
Finally, we were supposed to be in the middle of COP26. That's been moved sideways. Yes. This time next year, what do you want COP26 to achieve? What can it achieve?
Well, I think a very important part sitting here in Britain, I think, is that Britain has a real opportunity to sort of demonstrate its leadership in this agenda. And I really feel in the midst of so much anxiety and desperation around what's happening with the virus and the economic and physical and mental health crisis at the moment, I think we need something that we can look to say, actually, Britain is at the leading edge here. And I think it is. If you look at what Britain has done on carbon emissions, you know, I think I'm told they're back at 1890 levels here in the UK because of a switch to natural gas, because of a switch to renewables. What we have in the potential of offshore wind here in the UK. BP is hoping to build an industrial site in the northeast of England in Teesside, which will basically decarbonize an industrial cluster up there, steel making, fertilizer making, power generation. I mean, it could be green steel out of the northeast of England, would be absolutely fantastic. And I hope COP allows the UK the opportunity to show that it's right out there in front, and we want to help the government do that.
Bernard, you alluded to the anxiety, the
Yep.
pandemic. It's a challenging year.
Yes.
For your business,
yes.
for society, for colleagues and friends in the US and the UK. But I get a real sense you are just one of life's optimists.
Well,
why is that? What's the foundation of that?
Because I think it's not fun being any other way. Look, I think if I look at our own history, and if I look at the energy transition, and if I look at what's happening, one has two ways of looking at that if you're an oil company like we have been for 111 years. You could say it's a big risk. It's a risk to our business. Our core business is going to get eaten away and replaced with something new. My own view, when you think risk, you crouch down, you see shadows, you see darkness. And you know what, we said, let's flip it on its head. And I don't want to sound contrite or naive, but we said, let's flip it. Let's look at it as an opportunity. And honestly, the difference in looking at this as an opportunity, you start people getting more creative, more imaginative, more innovative. And we are discovering that actually it's not a threat. It's actually, there's a fantastic business opportunity. Our employees are energized. So I think there is something about, there is a choice in life. And somebody sent me a book for children that's called This Is All, or You Are Awesome. And it's about this choice you make. And I think more importantly than ever now, we need to make that choice to be looking at the positive, looking for the opportunity, and hopefully things will come of it.
Bernard, I'll settle for that. We're awesome. Bernard Looney, thank you very much.
Indeed, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you very much.